Welcome. Yeah.
So, thank you for having me. It's fantastic to be here in Finland. It's my first time coming here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the Martech madness and try and provide you with a practical overview of what you can take away from today and actually think about marketing technology differently to possibly how you've been doing so far. Before we kick off, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. So I spent a good while, more than a decade in the corporate world. I was a marketing director. I did used to wear a suit. I don't know how, but I did. I used to fly all over the world, to China, to Hong Kong, to Boston. I used to help the world's largest banks deliver their marketing services. A lot around marketing technology, a lot around content, and then I just went, why am I doing this? Why don't I become unemployed, otherwise known as a startup? So I'm 2 years deep. I launched the Martech Alliance, and we are a media company. We are all things Martech. A bunch of things we do. One of them that possibly may have heard of us, or hopefully you'll go away remembering us, is we produce the UK marketing technology landscape. I know the guys from Avels, they produce the local one, the Finnish one, and there's a load of others regionally. Beyond that, I have the pleasure of being a book club nerd, and I'm a librarian. So I get to interview the world's most famous authors. This is my humble brag, is I've interviewed the likes of Richard Branson, Seth Godin, Gary Vee. So that's if you like reading books, definitely have a look at the book club we produce. It's online and it's really good fun. But we are here really to talk about marketing technology. And the key thing I want to try and deliver today is how we can help make marketing technology simple, or better put, simpler. And simpler is definitely the truer description because it ain't simple. It's a very tough thing to do. But I'm going to try and decode it, break it down, and simplify it so we can take something practical and rational away today. Now, we all know marketing technology is booming, and there's loads of signs of that. These are some of the most common. You may or may not be familiar with this. So we've got probably the best example is Gartner's talks about how 30%, literally 1 in 3 conversations, 30% of marketing budgets are being spent on Martech. Now, I said one in 3 conversations, but I bet 1 in 3 conversations in your company isn't about Martech, but it needs to start to be. And Wipro have gone on further and said that 62% of CMOs are looking to drastically increase their spend this year. And then you have lots of other examples of just how booming this space is, from the likes of technology acquisitions of Salesforce, most recently acquiring Tableau for 15 billion, or you have the agency space. There's been a massive shift where agencies are suddenly waking up to the opportunity, and I'll be honest, the cash that exists in marketing technology and data. So we know marketing technology is booming. Everyone's here today. This event clearly is growing. But one of the things that I think is a problem with this is what Scott Brinker has described as Martech's law, is that organizational change is not moving at the same pace as technological change. And this is a big challenge, followed up by, I don't think people actually understand what Martech is. So it gets used a hell of a lot of times, but when people use the word Martech, I think people just think of this. They think of 7,000 logos. They think of Scott Brinker's lovely, amazing, beautiful landscape, but it's not particularly helpful, and it's completely overwhelming, and it's madness. So we need to not completely forget this, but we need to rethink it. Because looking at 7,000 solutions doesn't really help you build an integrated marketing technology strategy. So I'd like to rewind a little bit. I'd like to just stop and think and say, what is Martech? So it is the inception. It's where marketing technology meet. But it's much, much more than technology. It's much more than platforms. It's when these two worlds meet, what does that mean? And what does that mean across a whole range of different areas? It's definitely more than technology, though. So if we hear Martech and we think 7,000 logos, all we're thinking about is technology solutions, and we're not thinking about our strategy properly. So this is where I'd like to introduce you to my framework, which is the 4 Ps of marketing technology. It's the planning and strategy, it's the people and teams, it's the platforms, apps, and ecosystems through to process and operations. Now, most people are thinking bottom left corner, they're thinking platforms, apps, and ecosystems. They'll get cash, they'll spend it easily on lots of technology, lots of shiny new tools, and then it don't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because you need to think much bigger. You need to think about that impact that marketing technology has on everything you do. So another way to look at this, if we just step back for a moment, is we can think about the why, the who, the what, and the how. And I'm going to talk you through this framework in detail so you can take this away and practically think about how you tackle Martech in your organization. But before I do that, I don't want it to be heard that I'm saying the landscape is no good, because it's still fantastic, but there's a different way to look at it. You can look at this from the organization and the aggregation of different technology solutions. That is helpful. If we look at this, we forget the logos, take the logos out, throw them away and forget them. Think about these classifications. If we then marry that together with the 4 Ps of marketing technology which I've developed, it gives you a much more rationalized approach to tackling Martech and building your strategy. It allows you to systematically walk through how you develop your strategy in such a way that it's practical, meaningful, and you don't get sucked into just going shopping for new shiny tools. So we'll kick off first of all with planning and strategy. Now, hopefully, Martech has got to a point in your organization that there is a dedicated pillar, that when you're writing your marketing strategy, you have a dedicated section purely on Martech. And when you're writing and developing that you're not just thinking marketing technology solutions, but rather the full 4 Ps. I've got to say, honestly, at the moment, increasingly when I work with clients, I don't see this. I don't see it's clearly documented. I see the cash being spent. I see the 30% of a budget going on Martech, but it's not clearly articulated as there being a need for a clear, integrated Martech strategy. So this is fundamental. And when we start building our planning and strategy around Martech, we need to think bigger. We need to think beyond tech, and we need to marry that together to our business goals. We need to actually ask questions about what are we trying to achieve. And then we need to look at the customer journey and wrap that around what we're delivering as well. So as we're developing this, we're thinking about those 4 Ps and the different areas, but we're also thinking very closely around what the hell is the point of this? How are we going to measure the impact of this activity? There's a few different ways you can do this. There are workshops, there are surveys, there's different interviews, there's a whole range of different techniques. The thing that we find particularly helpful is to step back from all of that and try and systematically score it and measure your maturity. And doing that across the 4 Ps and those different marketing technology landscape classifications. It doesn't have to be completely science-based that it's test-driven. It's just having a frame to tackle this in such a way that you're asking the right questions and you're systematically scoring out where the opportunities are. If you look at this example here, we're lacking the people and teams of our social relationships. And there's lots more examples where this happens. What we say after you've spent that time really ingesting all these information data points, chatting with your teams, workshopping, is then stepping back, scoring it out, and looking at this holistically in such a way that you can identify where your roadmap needs to focus. So we talked about there the example of social and relationships. The tools aren't bad. They could be better, but they're not bad. But actually, they maybe would be scored much better if you had the right team in place. And this is one of the important messages I'd like you to take away today, is that you can't just buy tech and think it's the answer. You need to work very carefully and make sure that you're thinking across those 4 Ps and how intrinsically they're connected. If you have great tech but you're missing people, it's having a Ferrari but not having anybody to drive it. And you have similar scenarios when it comes through to process and operations as well, as we'll walk through as we move on. So, in summary, we need to make sure that we clearly document and we articulate what is our integrated Martech strategy. We need to do that in such a way that we're wrapping this activity around the customer journey. And we need to be asking what are simple questions that often don't get asked is, how is this driving our business goals? Before we do anything, before we go shopping, we need to take a real good understanding of where we sit right now and score out and audit all of our activities so we can systematically understand the opportunities. And visualizing this in the example I gave you is a nice way to demonstrate the opportunities for growth in your roadmap. Moving on. So once we've got our plans and strategy in place, we need to think about one of the most forgotten parts of technology is people, and making sure we have the people and teams in place. Now, I think it's eConsultancy said in 2018, 45% of organizations identified that they're lacking the Martech skills they need to drive their strategy. I would say it's probably higher than that, but that was incredibly insightful. So one of my messages here for how you can best tackle this is thinking holistically about your team. And I think you tackle this in such a way that you Tetris your team. What I mean by this is really breaking down the different types of people that need to sit within a Martech team and how they mix and match together. To give you a more practical example, we'll jump over in a second, we'll talk through roles, but just before I flip over, when we're talking about fat Ts, we're talking about what has also been known as full stack marketers, or they've also sometimes referred to as growth marketers. These are individuals that have a lot of depth and breadth. They're almost the unicorns, yeah? They're the people that are amazing at loads of stuff. Yes, you do want them. They're difficult to find, but there are some out there. I wouldn't say that that's all you need. I think you also need to think about specialist roles. And equally, when you're thinking about people and teams, it's very important that you don't just stop and think in-house. You need to think about the agencies and consultancies that can help deliver programs for you and work collectively together. So this is a more practical example of some of the roles that might sit into those different shapes and how they might mix and match together. There are lots of different examples like this. I would say there's certain parts of Martech, certain key areas that make more sense to be specialized than others. But equally, at the same time, having those individuals that are the growth marketer or the full stack marketer in a core driving seat is brilliant because it allows you to move with speed and agility that previously wasn't possible. Now, you might have noticed what I didn't do is give you a templated team of what a Martech organization should look like. I don't think there is one. I think there's too many questions you have to ask before you can arrive at that. However, what I've done with this slide here is broken down the types of roles and the types of functions you may need. Naturally, the level that you need will depend massively on the size of your organization, the complexity, your plans. But this is very helpful for asking questions around, have you got individuals driving different parts of your Martech roadmap? Marrying together, though, not just what skills do you need as a team, but a collective, but taking it back to that strategy and who's going to deliver what for you. Equally, some of these functions I've mentioned here, I wouldn't go out and say you need a person to do this. What you might have is certain scenarios, and I've seen this a lot, you might have, for example, someone who's actually leading your SEO strategy that happens to be also the marketing technologist. Or you might have the CRM manager who actually has other areas of responsibility. I would take these functions and roles and step back and think about the skills and functions versus the job titles. In summary, we need to mix and match our teams. We need to think about different types of function. We need to Tetris that team out, but think holistically. Think about a collective team, not as individuals and skills you need. And when you're breaking this out, also think about marrying this together to your roadmap. What specific skills and functions are needed to drive that roadmap? And then making sure that you're not just thinking internally, that you're thinking about those consultancy and agency partners that can help accelerate your growth. With the perfect plans and strategy in place and people and teams set up, we can now start thinking about technology piece, the platforms, apps, and ecosystems. So we're going to throw away the logos. We're not going to start with any logos, any landscape at all. We're going to start with the customer journey. Now, there's lots of other types of framework you can look at. If you like a nice Martech stack, check out the Stackies in the US. They do some fantastic, pretty overviews of how you might frame your stack. And there's other frameworks you can adopt. We would just say, have a look at this and make sure it's customer-centric. Think about asking questions about what it is that you can improve in the customer journey. So this is a simple framework, just so I can articulate the point, but it's possibly too simplistic, I would say. We now go back to the landscape and we grab those classifications and we throw them on top. So this is a very top level. We just take those top 6 domains and we just plot them across the customer journey. So we can start to ask questions of the types of solution we may want in each one. Now it gets more complicated. Now we start breaking down into the subcategories. Now, at the moment, you'll notice what I've done is I've included every single category. This isn't to say everybody needs every category. Naturally, it will depend on your customer journey, your product offering, your service. But again, this is a helpful way to ask yourself questions of, have you got the right tech in your stack? Are you improving the customer journey? If you start with this and then go back and actually populate it with the different solutions you have within your stack, is when you'll start to arrive at identifying instances where you're lacking the tech needed to accelerate your roadmap. So these aren't any logos we've endorsed. These are just some examples of what might be dropped in. There is obviously 7,000 different ones. But what I would say is take this away, take that framework, and color it in yourself. Ask yourself the questions of what stack do you have in place? What technology exists at the moment for you? When you can visualize the stack you have, so you notice we haven't talked about going shopping, we haven't talked about the need for new tech yet. Once you can clearly communicate internally every single piece of technology you have and where it sits in that customer journey, then and only then is the point at which you can start asking rational questions around what technology is failing us and we should retire. What is it that we need to spend more time and effort on improving? What technology is doing a job and we should just retain it? And then where are the gaps? Now, one thing I find all too often is that it's quick and easy to go shopping, and people will get sign-off to spend millions of pounds on fantastic new technology without having clearly asked questions, first of all, of the existing tech stack they have in place. And the net result of that ultimately ends up being that you've got new shiny toys, but they end up failing. The other thing that's particularly helpful about adopting this approach is, especially when you're in a large organization, I think you'll find at least 20 to 30% of the time, there's tech in place that you didn't know existed. And you'll be doubling up on technology, and there'll be opportunities for cost saving that you can reinvest back into your stack. So whenever we work with clients and we do this audit process, their face lights up when they see the slide before and actually see the tech stack they have in place. They don't know. They don't realize that there's so many different parts of the business that are doing similar things and there's overlap in technology. Now, the other thing I would say is when you're going to go and implement and introduce a brand new piece of technology to your stack, it's absolutely critical that you do this properly. Make sure you have clear business use cases. Make sure you understand what difference this technology is supposed to be delivering for you. Make sure you have your RFIs, your RFPs, that you're doing your research in detail. I do think this is another area where it's not a case that tech fails, it's that marketers haven't done their due diligence to make sure it's the right fit for them. Technology is fantastic. It's very, very rarely the reason for failure. It's more often than not that it's the wrong tech that's been selected. And equally, on to the next one, possibly the other thing that hasn't been thought about is, again, thinking about your stack holistically. We talked about thinking about your team as a collective. You need to think about your stack in that same way as well. It's not just about thinking about one great solution and what it delivers, but rather collectively, how does your stack work together? The biggest challenge marketers find is their stack is not integrated. And if it's not integrated, you can have something that's incredibly powerful, but it's only delivering on 20 to 30% of what it could. I won't talk about the whole range of different ways in which you might think about your stack, but if you are more interested, I would recommend the guys at Cabinet M. They do a fantastic job, and there's a brilliant book called Attack Your Stack. Equally, there's a little bit of a movement at the moment, people talking about platform ecosystems. I'll just leave you saying that you need to think carefully about how all of your technology pieces plot together. And naturally, you need to think about the plumbing as well. They are two separate points. You can have your stack integrated together, but you haven't gone deep enough to really understand the data architecture and modeling needed that you can truly integrate. This is another thing we find a lot when we chat with clients, is they've got really powerful technology, they've actually connected it, but they haven't gone deep enough. They haven't really thought about the implications of how their data is going to push and pull between different systems. We won't go into too much detail here with the time we have, but it's worth thinking very carefully about your data architecture when you're making any new introduction of technology or when you're auditing what's already in place. Three simple things, but they're not simple. Audit, map, and stack. Right, we are on to the fourth and final P, process and operations. So on the process and operations side, the one key thing we want to achieve with this is making sure that you really capitalize on the technology you have in place. So people can be very good at those first three, but then don't actually stop and say, what does it mean to be in a Martech world, in a Martech-driven organization? How does that change operationally what we do now? So there's lots of different flavors of Agile, which we won't delve into in too much detail, but I would just recommend that it's a methodology that's incredibly helpful. The reason it's so helpful is it's been used by technology teams for decades now. And they've been grappling with the challenges that come with technology projects and their use. And Martech now lives in technology. Therefore, their methodology makes a lot of sense. At a very top level, I'm sure people know enough about Agile, but it's about being collaborative, it's about being iterative, it's about continuous improvement and making sure that what you do is data-driven. Now, one thing that can be beautiful is this sort of science-driven, formulaic approach to marketing where we can suddenly think about CPLs, MQLs, we can reverse engineer our cost of acquisition and everything's perfect and we just work in this world where we adapt dials and we become incredibly sophisticated in this execution. I would just be cautious when you think about this and when you think about the power of data. The thing to also have is to step back and make sure that you're informed and not driven, that you're stopping and thinking about what the data's telling you. There can be lots of instances where the data looks like it's telling you that your cost per lead has improved and it's amazing, but if you're not carrying it all the way through to attribution, are you working on the wrong metrics? Another example of changing the way in which you think in terms of your marketing operations is obviously really embedding automation at the heart of everything you do. Thinking about the personalization and scalability, the real conversational architecture that you can now do at scale and really optimize your communications. But again, with automation, it can be beautiful, but it can be horrific. You need to stay close to it. You need to make sure you're looking underneath the hood and that you're really understanding, are you actually nurturing somebody? Or are you just pumping more emails at them because you want to get a tick box to say you've got a nurturing program in place? So stepping back, stopping and thinking. Whilst it's beautiful to have amazing technology and data in place, it's just got to make sure you stop and think carefully about what the data's doing for you and how your systems are performing. And then from an analytics and insight perspective, we've got more data than ever. We've got more insight than ever, which is beautiful. It's brilliant. We can know more than we ever did. But we can equally get caught up in vanity metrics. So I would say I've seen loads of beautiful, amazing dashboards, but when I ask the question of saying, have you got attribution on what really makes a difference? Have you got one dashboard that if you've got 3 minutes in a day, you look at that and it tells you what you really need to know? The answer is often no. So I strongly recommend that you step back and have one key dashboard to start with, something that tells you what really matters, that's aligned with your business goals. I'm not suggesting you have no more than that one, but start with that. Don't get carried away with vanity metrics and information overload. And then my final point on process and operations is the importance of operational alignment. And this goes back a little bit to the marketing operations role, which was touched on one of the screens, one of the slides we had earlier when talking about teams. There's so many different pieces of technology now. There's so many different solutions. There's so many customer touch points that ensuring that you have somebody that's looking very carefully and making sure that all of your channels are aligned, all of your activities collectively communicated, making sure you can truly deliver an integrated multi-channel communication activity is critical. And again, these things sound obvious, but they get overlooked. People don't stop and think, we've just made that massive investment in a brand new marketing cloud solution. Have we carried that the whole way through to what this means at nuts and bolts level? Oh, it's caught up. Make sure you're agile. Think about being data informed, automation analytics, and ops alignment. I've got 50 seconds. I'm good. My final point really is that the 4 Ps of marketing technology doesn't finish. It's a perpetual cycle. Each P is pushing back around. You're constantly improving what you do, learning more, reassessing your stack, looking at the team you have in place and asking questions about whether you have the right team skills, making sure you're looking at the integration of your different data points from a platform's perspective, and then rethinking your plans and adapting them based on the customer journey. Now, I've covered quite a lot, but there's a hell of a lot more I could tell you about the 4 Ps of marketing technology. You can jump over to our site if you would like, and we've got a complete write-up and breakdown on the methodology. Beyond that, you can also check out our UK Martech landscape if you'd like to download that. If you want any more from me, you can find me online in a bunch of places. I mentioned our book club. That's in the bottom right for you as well. Thank you.